The story opens on a quiet, rainy afternoon. Leela is alone in her cozy suburban home, going about her routine when she notices a steady drip from the kitchen ceiling. Water is pooling in a small puddle near the sink, spreading slowly but steadily. Panic sets in. She knows that if it isn't fixed quickly, the damage could be expensive and extensive. Normally, she would call her husband David, but he is away on a business trip, leaving her to handle the problem alone. The situation feels overwhelming. Leela, usually confident in handling small household issues, is now confronted with a challenge that seems bigger than her capabilities. Reluctantly, she decides to call David's friend Mark. Mark has always been friendly, dependable, and handy, the kind of person you can trust with minor home repairs. When she explains the situation over the phone, Mark assures her he can come over immediately to take care of it. His tone is calm and reassuring, and Leela, despite a slight hesitation, feels comforted by the idea of having someone she knows in her home. There's an initial relief that someone is stepping in to solve the problem, and Leela sets aside her unease to wait for him. When Mark arrives, the first impression is ordinary. He carries a toolbox and wears his work clothes, greeting Leela with a friendly smile and a casual air. However, as he enters, Leela notices small details that seem slightly unusual. The way he scans the room, the familiarity in his gestures, the way he moves about the kitchen as if he knows it intimately. While these things might be attributed to habit or friendship, they begin planting subtle seeds of unease in Leela's mind. She tells herself she is imagining things, attributing the feelings to the stress of the leak. As Mark starts working on the sink, he talks casually, sharing small anecdotes about times he and David tackled similar problems. He jokes lightly, making Leela feel slightly more at ease, but she notices a few lingering glances, moments when his eyes seem to study her, not just the repair. Leela's mind oscillates between relief at having help and a growing awareness that something about the visit feels slightly off. She watches as Mark examines the pipes, noting how confident and knowledgeable he is, yet also how he seems to take an unusual interest in her presence, asking about David, about her routines, and casually remarking on her home in ways that feel almost intrusive. By the end of part 1, the reader senses the tension building. The scene is grounded in a relatable domestic setting, but hints of psychological unease are beginning to creep in. The ordinary problem of a leaking sink transforms into the first thread of suspense, setting the stage for a story where trust, boundaries, and hidden intentions will be tested. Leela is left with a mixture of gratitude, unease, and a subtle curiosity about Mark's visit, unaware that this ordinary afternoon will soon spiral into a complex and unsettling ordeal. As the leak repair continues, Leela begins to notice subtle but increasingly uncomfortable aspects of Mark's behavior. At first, everything seems perfectly normal. He moves confidently under the sink, inspects pipes, and uses his tools with practiced ease. His presence, meant to be helpful, initially brings her a sense of relief. Yet, as he works, he starts asking questions that feel oddly personal. Instead of focusing solely on the plumbing, Mark inquires about David's habits, his work schedule, his reactions to stressful situations, and the routines he follows at home. He even casually asks Leela about her own daily life, probing into small details that seem irrelevant to the task at hand. Leela experiences a mix of confusion and unease. She's aware that Mark has been friends with David for a long time, which could explain some familiarity. Yet there's an intensity in his tone, a subtle insistence in his questions, that makes her instinctively recoil. She tries to keep the conversation light, responding politely without revealing too much. But even as she attempts to maintain normalcy, she notices how Mark seems to have an uncanny awareness of small details. He comments on decorations she doesn't remember mentioning to David, notices small changes in the kitchen's layout, and even references conversations he supposedly heard about the house. Beyond the questions, his actions start to feel invasive. He lingers longer than necessary, crouching near her as he examines the leak, glancing at items on the counter, and moving through the house with an ease that feels more like intrusion than helpfulness. Leela catches herself feeling tense, a faint unease creeping into what should have been a simple repair. She begins to wonder if his visit is really just about the leak, or if there's another motive she hasn't identified yet. At the same time, Mark's mannerisms subtly blur the line between friendliness and something more unsettling. He smiles often, but there's a lingering intensity in his gaze that makes Leela feel observed rather than helped. His casual jokes, once comforting, now carry a slightly disarming quality. He seems to know more than he should, teasing about things David has told him or details Leela hadn't mentioned. The story emphasizes this growing tension, building suspense while keeping the setting mundane enough to feel believable. A simple household repair has started to feel like a psychological chess game. By the end of part 2, Leela is caught in a web of conflicting emotions. She's grateful for Mark's help and expertise, but increasingly wary of his probing questions and oddly familiar demeanor. The ordinary domestic scene has shifted into an unsettling encounter where trust, personal boundaries, and intuition collide. The reader begins to sense that what started as a helpful visit may evolve into something far more complicated and potentially dangerous, laying the groundwork for the suspense and psychological tension that will dominate the following parts of the story. After Mark leaves briefly to fetch a replacement part, Leela begins to notice things in her home that unsettle her. At first, they are small and easily dismissed: a drawer slightly ajar that she is certain she closed, a few papers out of place, and a kitchen towel she didn't leave where it is. These minor discrepancies feel almost insignificant, but as she pauses to reflect, a creeping sense of unease begins to take hold. Leela tries to rationalize what she sees. Maybe she moved things herself absent-mindedly, or perhaps Mark accidentally shifted items while working. Yet her intuition tells her something is off. As she moves through the house, checking the living room and hallway, Leela notices other subtle hints. A photo on a shelf slightly tilted, a book open to a page she didn't remember reading, and the faint scent of someone else lingering in the air. These small anomalies accumulate, layering tension and creating an atmosphere of psychological suspense. The ordinary familiarity of her home, the space she once found comforting, is beginning to feel alien. Leela starts to question whether Mark's visit is truly innocent or if he might have ulterior motives she cannot yet discern. When Mark returns, he carries the replacement part casually, chatting as if nothing is wrong. Leela feels a surge of anxiety, sensing a discrepancy between his calm demeanor and her growing suspicion. She observes how effortlessly he moves around the space, as though he knows every corner of her home. His presence, initially comforting and familiar, now strikes her as invasive. Leela's mind races, trying to piece together the odd behavior she has noticed. The personal questions, the lingering glances, the subtle probing into her life. Each detail adds to the tension, making her increasingly aware that Mark's visit may be about more than just the leaking sink. During the repair, she notices him touching objects with a casual familiarity that feels almost intimate. He handles personal items, comments on decor she didn't mention to anyone, and seems to register her reactions with a quiet, calculating interest. This behavior unsettles Leela, creating a mixture of fear and curiosity. She begins to suspect that Mark may have been in her home before, unnoticed, and that his knowledge of her personal space is far deeper than she initially realized. By the end of part 3, Leela is caught between relief that the leak is being addressed and a growing sense of danger. The story pivots from the simple domestic problem of a broken pipe to a tense psychological scenario. The ordinary act of fixing a leak becomes a stage for subtle intrusion and the slow uncovering of hidden truths. Leela's perception shifts. The helpful friend is no longer merely a repairman, but a figure whose intentions are increasingly ambiguous. Suspense deepens as the reader shares in Leela's mounting anxiety, understanding that the seemingly mundane afternoon is on the cusp of escalating into a more serious, unsettling confrontation. That night, Leela finds herself unable to sleep. The ordinary events of the afternoon replay in her mind, each small oddity now magnified by her growing unease. The leak repair, which initially seemed like a simple, mundane task, has left her feeling unsettled. She reflects on Mark's behavior, the personal questions, his intense gaze, his familiarity with her home, and realizes that these were not mere coincidences. Something about his visit has disturbed the natural order of her life, and she feels a quiet urgency to understand why. Leela begins piecing together the clues she has unconsciously gathered throughout the day. She recalls moments when Mark seemed to know details that only someone with intimate knowledge of her household or her husband could possibly know. She remembers his casual remarks about David's habits, the way he handled her personal belongings, and the lingering glances that made her skin crawl. Each recollection forms a pattern, Mark's visit may not have been purely about fixing a leak. There is an underlying purpose she hasn't yet uncovered. Determined to understand, Leela starts examining her home more carefully. She notices subtle evidence that hints at Mark's repeated presence before she realized it. Small objects have been shifted in ways that suggest he has been observing her routines. Notes she keeps tucked away in drawers appear slightly disturbed. Even her private items, which she had assumed were secure, seem to have been handled. The realization is chilling. Mark's knowledge of her home is unnervingly precise, and it cannot be explained merely by his friendship with David. The psychological tension heightens as Leela contemplates what this knowledge could mean. Why would Mark need to know so much about her life, her husband, and the layout of her home? She begins to consider the possibility of an unhealthy obsession, perhaps a fixation on David that extends into her life, or a more sinister interest in Leela herself. The ordinary domestic setting, which should have provided comfort and security, now feels threatening. Leela's sense of vulnerability grows, and the suspense builds as she realizes that the simple act of letting a friend into her home may have inadvertently allowed danger to enter as well. This part of the story shifts the narrative from subtle unease to psychological thriller. Leela's internal conflict deepens. She is torn between trusting Mark as a friend of her husband and acknowledging her instinctive fear. Her observations mark the turning point in the story, the transition from ordinary domesticity to a tense, suspense-driven plot. The reader becomes aware that Mark's visit was not just an act of neighborly assistance, but part of a larger hidden intention that could threaten Leela's safety or disrupt her life. By the end of Part 4, the tension reaches a critical peak. Leela has begun to uncover the hidden truth. Mark's motives are ambiguous and potentially dangerous. The story is no longer about a leak in the kitchen, but about the fragile boundaries of trust and the unsettling realization that those closest to us can sometimes harbor secrets we never suspected. Leela's growing awareness sets the stage for the inevitable confrontation, keeping the reader on edge as they anticipate how she will respond to the threat lurking within the familiar walls of her home. The tension that has been quietly building over the past days reaches its breaking point in Part 5. Leela can no longer ignore the mounting unease surrounding Mark's visit. After careful consideration, she decides to confront him directly, not with aggression, but with a combination of clever strategy and careful observation. She understands that this encounter must be controlled. Mark has already demonstrated an unsettling familiarity with her home and habits, and Leela knows that any misstep could escalate the situation dangerously. The confrontation begins under the guise of needing further help with another minor problem in the house. Leela intentionally sets the scene in a controlled environment, ensuring that she has easy access to exits and that her phone is nearby. When Mark arrives, he is still casual and confident, carrying himself with the same calm demeanor that has unnervingly characterized his visits so far. His behavior suggests that he does not sense any suspicion on Leela's part, and he remains unaware of the careful plan she has constructed. As they engage in conversation, Leela begins to probe Mark's intentions, carefully watching his reactions. She asks questions that seem innocuous on the surface, but are designed to reveal inconsistencies in his story and hints of hidden motives. She observes subtle tells, hesitation, slight shifts in posture, changes in tone, that indicate he is reacting to her probing. Leela's intuition, sharpened by the strange discoveries of previous days, guides her through the delicate balance of confrontation and observation. The encounter escalates as Mark becomes defensive, though still maintaining an air of calm. Leela presses further, addressing his knowledge of personal details, his questions about David, and his lingering familiarity with the home. Mark's demeanor cracks slightly, revealing a mixture of frustration and obsession. He attempts to rationalize his behavior, claiming concern for Leela's well-being or protective instincts toward David, but his explanations carry an unsettling intensity. It becomes evident that his visit is motivated by more than neighborly concern. He harbors a disturbing fixation that blurs the boundaries between friendship and intrusion. Leela remains composed, using evidence she has gathered over the past days to challenge him. She references the subtle signs of his repeated presence in the home, the personal items that were disturbed, and the specific knowledge he possesses. This calculated approach forces Mark to confront the reality that Leela is not naive. She is aware of his behavior and is prepared to act if necessary. The psychological tension reaches its peak as Mark realizes that his intentions are no longer hidden, and Leela's assertiveness shifts the power dynamic in her favor. By the end of Part 5, the confrontation resolves without physical violence, but it leaves both characters shaken. Leela has successfully asserted boundaries, revealing the hidden truth behind Mark's visit, while Mark departs with his motives exposed but unfulfilled. The story transitions from suspense to resolution, emphasizing Leela's growing strength and resourcefulness. This part underscores the themes of trust, personal boundaries, and the necessity of intuition in navigating complex interpersonal dynamics, setting the stage for the final aftermath in Part 6. After the tense confrontation with Mark, Leela is left alone in her home, her mind racing as she processes the events of the past few days. The ordinary rhythm of her life has been disrupted, replaced by a heightened awareness of boundaries, trust, and personal safety. Though Mark has left, the psychological impact of his visit lingers. Leela reflects on how quickly a seemingly mundane event, a leaking sink, spiraled into a deeply unsettling situation. This part of the story focuses not on immediate action, but on the emotional and psychological aftermath of the ordeal, highlighting Leela's growth and resilience. Leela begins by assessing the tangible consequences of Mark's presence. She notices that while the leak has been fixed, subtle signs of intrusion remain: objects slightly shifted, personal notes left out of place, and the lingering awareness that someone once had intimate knowledge of her home. These reminders underscore the fragility of her sense of security and serve as a stark contrast to the normalcy of everyday life. The story emphasizes that the aftermath of unsettling events often persists, influencing perception and behavior even after the immediate threat has passed. Emotionally, Leela experiences a mixture of relief, anger, and lingering fear. Relief comes from knowing that she successfully confronted Mark and established her boundaries. Anger arises from the realization that someone she trusted, David's close friend, crossed the line in ways that were invasive and disturbing. Fear, though diminished, remains present as a subtle undercurrent, reminding her that vigilance and intuition are necessary when trust is placed in others. The interplay of these emotions contributes to her psychological complexity, showing how ordinary people respond to extraordinary circumstances. Leela also reflects on her relationship with David. She recognizes the importance of communication and transparency in marriage, realizing that trust must be mutual and boundaries respected. While David is unaware of the near danger she faced, Leela contemplates how she might share the experience without causing unnecessary alarm. This reflection reinforces the story's broader themes: the intersection of trust, personal safety, and the unexpected challenges that can emerge even in familiar domestic settings. By the end of Part 6, Leela demonstrates personal growth. She emerges stronger, more self-aware, and more assertive. The experience has taught her the value of trusting her instincts and taking decisive action when confronted with ambiguous threats. Mark's departure closes the immediate conflict, but the story leaves a lingering tension. The sense that the ordinary world can conceal hidden complexities and dangers, and that vigilance, courage, and careful observation are essential tools for navigating life. The conclusion also offers a subtle reminder that safety and peace are not always guaranteed, but they can be reclaimed through awareness, courage, and deliberate action. Leela's experience transforms what began as a simple household repair into a story of psychological suspense, personal empowerment, and the enduring human capacity to face unexpected challenges. The narrative closes with a sense of resolution, yet it retains a lingering tension, leaving readers reflecting on the thin line between trust and intrusion and the resilience required to navigate it.